Okay, surprise, surprise, we are back at Holden Arboretum for my morning walk. This will have to be broken into two parts, although I might put them together later because I only have time for a short walk now. Then I have to get back to something, and then I will come back because I've had a lot on my mind, and I think some of this combines some of what my own personal past has been, which is a search for knowledge, with what I'm discovering and learning now. You might say outside the bounds of knowledge or separate from knowledge, but it's a very interesting interplay. And I guess the motivation for this is that I had a brief discussion with somebody yesterday regarding the reality of fields. So in this context, it was the electromagnetic field, or you could say the electric field. However, we don't need to get terribly complicated, although this can lead all the way into quantum field theory, which essentially postulates that the entire universe has fields, each particle having a field that interact with each other, and that leads to what we call the standard model of physics, which really is a very accurate explanation of the world that we see, the particles, the fundamental particles that we see, right, in physics. But there's some discrepancies. It doesn't incorporate gravity. There's a problem with the vacuum. There's a number of issues, and I don't claim to be an expert in that. My thorough study of physics really ended when I left, or rigorous study, I should say, when I left school, and I focused more on mathematics and solving engineering problems for like the last, my goodness, maybe 20 to 30 years. I'd hate to even think about it, how long that's been. But I've never lost my interest in physics, but it changed a lot, because when I started out, it was to understand maybe at a deeper level everything, right? Like I was groping for understanding life in its all entirety, and physics came the closest to that. I mean, it talks about the fundamental nature of reality, and surely if we understand that, the building blocks essentially, we can understand everything else. But that's where it falls down tremendously, because understanding how subatomic particles behave in a particle accelerator and is not the same as understanding the complexity of life and everything around you. It's a huge gap. And when one is interested in understanding truth and reality, to even use those terms, one can say, well, there's a certain form of truth or reality to be understood by physics. But to then make the leap and say that that explains everything, that you understand everything by understanding one tiny part of how this physical world works, like being able to describe, say, the electrical force between two particles. Well, that's interesting and useful, and you can create a lot of engineering tools using that mathematical construct, but to equate that with understanding truth and reality is the problem. And this is what I wanted to discuss, because I think many people in our modern era will take that perspective, that science has advanced so greatly, right? And we have learned so much about how the world works, and therefore the path to understanding everything is to simply keep progressing down that path of scientific inquiry in the way that we've been doing it, and eventually everything will be understood, the world will be a utopia, war will end, and goodness will come upon the face of the earth. And that's not true. And that's really what I wanted to talk about. And to get to the root of it all, I think it's important to see how people can become deluded by scientific ideas, as interesting as they may be, as enticing as they may be, and as effective as they may be at describing phenomena in the world. It's so important to see the limitations of all that, because if you don't see the limitations, you will treat it as almost as a religion. It forms a new belief system. I believe in the laws of physics. I believe in science. I believe. And I've seen these debates between the scientific and, say, religious communities, right, which take different perspectives. And both are wrong. Neither sees truth as a whole, right? That it goes beyond just the mechanical, the theories, the laws, the mathematics, the descriptive nature, right? Because we can call all of science and engineering a descriptive model of reality. It's how things work. So you can observe the force between a positive and negative particle and measure it, and then observe that it has a certain behavior with distance, and then you can write down a mathematical equation that allows you to calculate that force as a function of distance, and you can arrive at, say, Coulomb's law. And you can go further and link, you know, electric fields and magnetic fields and say, now I understand how these things interoperate, how magnetism links with electricity, and get the whole electromagnetic, you know, the Maxwell's laws, right, essentially. And you can go further and get all the way to quantum field theory or beyond. You know, people are searching for a theory that even goes beyond that, a theory of everything. It's still not there. And this, so you can just keep going and going, but then the important point to understand is what is actually happening. And what's really happening is people confuse ideas about reality with reality itself, or maybe a better term, truth. Truth and reality, I like to distinguish between them, because reality is sort of how you live, right? You can have a reality that is immersed in, say, Catholicism, and then your entire reality is that world of ideas becomes your reality, right? And you live in that reality, right? Your daily actions are dictated by that reality, which is really a belief system, which is a set of ideas. And we've gone into this endlessly, but then every idea is limited, never whole, never full, right? You can do the same thing with science. You can say, I want to believe in these laws of science. I believe that just because we're able to describe phenomena in nature, maybe very precisely, and say, yes, that is a very good description of reality. Is that truth, though? And one thing, the short answer is no, right? The long answer is you have to figure this out on your own. But I think the important thing here is to go into and examine what people may hold as true. So, for example, the electric field, let's just take that as an example. Is that real? And what's important is, what do we mean by real? Right? What do we mean by truth? If we don't understand what we mean by these words, then how can you say something is anything? Right? So we can get caught in language games here, which is also a problem. Because no matter how we word this, what words we use, those words are not reality in the deepest sense. Those words are certainly not truth. So no number of words, no number of discussions or arguments is ever going to allow one to see or understand or perceive truth. It can't come about through some kind of argument. What one can do, though, is see the limitations of knowledge through a discussion of words. And through that insight into the limitation of knowledge, perhaps arrive at a higher understanding, if we want to say that. Just seeing the flaws in knowledge, right? Seeing that, then you don't hold it up as the ultimate anymore, right? And one thing to see really quickly is, let's just take science, because I think a lot of people have, you know, chipped away at traditional religions to the point where some people may say, well, let's, you know, that's clearly a belief system, but science is not. It's based on fact. Well, it is based on observations, which is fact, but the theories that evolve around those observations are not fact. And that's a really important distinction, because what is observed directly and without bias in almost a scientific manner can be regarded as the closest form of truth. Observations. You observe what you observe. Now thought takes over and says, okay, I observed that. From that observation, I want to come up with a theory that explains my observations and maybe pulls together different observations and is able to describe a class of observations in a single way. So gravity is a great example of that. You know, we like to say Newton, you know, let's say Newton's laws of gravity, right? That everyone sort of knew objects fell, right, in different size objects. And, you know, Galileo, the infamous, dropped the two different items off the Tower of Pisa, and, you know, to see if one fell faster than the other. There were a lot of observations throughout history before Newton came around that were sort of separate observations. And then this is what I always loved about science, because then someone comes along and says, I have a theory of gravity, say Newton, I mean, this isn't exactly how it happened, but let's paraphrase it this way, that says this mathematical expression can explain how objects attract each other with different mass. So, and it can describe the motion of falling objects pretty accurately, you know, except when you have air resistance, except when, you know, you can't calculate mass correctly. I mean, there's all sorts of like exceptions, right? It's an idealized formula, but it is written in terms of mass. Say something that's measurable, distance, which is measurable, and force, which is also can be measured. And so you can, you know, and that's one of the first things I learned in physics: trajectories, the motion of objects under gravitational acceleration. I mean, it's how you learn, you know, how I originally learned calculus from that approach, you know, acceleration and all the derivatives of position and velocity, and, you know, you can learn a lot. It's a good starting point, right? And then that is very enticing, because then it says, okay, this is really interesting, because these mathematics allow me to describe phenomena in the world in a way that we can, you know, engineer things, right? We can build things based off these laws. And this is also true of electricity, electromagnetism, and all of what we know about, say, electrical engineering, and all that is well-founded in various theories of math and science, which can explain and describe a lot of behavior between, you know, between things. It's often like, you know, things are never isolated. So even electricity, electromagnetism is like the attraction between two particles. I mean, you can have a field of a single particle, but it doesn't really help you much until you have an interaction with something else. So more of these forces are about interactions, right, between two or more things. So gravity really doesn't matter until you have two objects of mass that are attracting each other. A single object of mass, what would gravity be, right? So it's always about relationship. That's another important thing. Or two charges, positive, negative, or positive, positive, whatever. You can describe a force between those two or more particles. But these laws are less useful for one single isolated particle, which really doesn't ever exist in reality, ever. But you can conceive of a single isolated particle in that way. So the idea being, you can, you know, we could talk endlessly about the theories of physics, engineering, and all that, but let's just say we have very good descriptive models of nature that can explain a lot. And using descriptive laws, engineering can build things. so we can send people to the moon with this knowledge. We can build cell phones and transmit thoughts across our so-called, electromagnetic waves, right? We have all these ideas of how this happens. And because that succeeds, we then say we understand reality, we understand truth, because we understand that part of it, and we can build things, right? But the mistake to make here, the mistake that I would argue that people make, is then taking those ideas as the reality itself, rather than a description of some underlying reality that perhaps can't be fully described. And this is where we can fill our heads full of mathematical ideas, concept, laws, equations, and then say, I understand the world because I understand these fractional behavioral laws. And this is the problem. When we equate the idea with the reality, the word with the thing, because the word is not the thing. We've discussed this many times. You can have a word for a tree that's not the tree. A word that's an item on a menu that's not the actual food item on the menu. And you can have a mathematical law that is an idea that describes observations very accurately, but is not the actual reality itself, is not the underlying reality, right? And this is, some may say, well, this is philosophical, right? And one can say that this is an ontological discussion, right? I'm trying to understand reality rather than just accepting that all we can ever know are these equations. And this is where, the rubber hits the road, because can you go beyond these expressions? Can you understand and see that these laws are always evolving, first of all, always changing, right? So science and even the laws of electrostatics were developed first, the laws of electromagnetism were developed later. And so because there's always more you can add to it, it's also an indication that it's incomplete. How can something incomplete be truth? Be the ultimate reality, right? Which let's reserve that word or truth is the ultimate reality, right? What's behind it all? What's more the complete picture, not the partial picture? And this is, so I will have to end here for now, and then we'll pick it up, hopefully seamlessly in this video, but I do have to leave. But I think this is so important, because without this understanding, so many people will continue in their delusional beliefs that these laws of physics or laws of whatever mathematical laws we come up with are reality itself. And this is especially true the more we can describe. So like quantum field theory is very successful, but it's all based on fields, right? So it's based on this idea of fields, which are very similar to electromagnetic fields, and that particles are simply ripples in these fields, energy perturbations in these fields. So then we say, well, we take these fields to be the ultimate reality. But what does that actually mean? You think these fields are like, what does it mean for something to be real? So when you say a field, other than the fact that a field is a mathematical construct, do you take that field to be truth? What does that mean to do that? What does it mean to take an idea that's even a very good descriptive idea and to call it reality and call it truth? Is it just because that idea describes behavior and observations very accurately that we refer to something as truth, knowing that there are holes in it, that it's incomplete? We know it's not complete as it currently stands. There doesn't exist a theory of everything. And even if there was a theory of everything, that theory does not explain a tree, right? It explains the behavior of subatomic particles, the behavior of the experiments that are performed, right, to observe it. And no one has ever claimed like biology can be derived from the laws of physics. That's a large stretch. And some may say, well, yes, but it eventually will be. But that's faith, right? It's not there now. It currently cannot. It doesn't help us understand things at that macroscopic level to really have what we may call even a complete understanding of, say, the building blocks, if we want to, building blocks of matter and energy, it's not really the same as saying that that thing is like a fundamental reality. So, hi. So, yeah, that's kind of where I want to go, but I will have to stop it here and pick it up later. So we're going to pick this up at the back end of Holden today. And I think the title of this video is going to be Are Fields Real? And these fields are real. I thought it was kind of appropriate to just point that out. The most real thing there is. You know, they're here, and this is kind of what we really need to get at. And what's real, what's not real, what's truth, what's idea, what's conceptualization. I've gone over this before, but I don't know. There's different ways to look at it. And also you can look at the same thing twice and 10 times and come up with something different. But I think the importance here is to get at is our mathematical descriptions of the behavior that we observe in this world equivalent to the world itself, equivalent to reality? Or are they simply mathematical constructs, mental constructs that we use to explain observed behavior? And this is kind of fundamental, because I think many people would say the fundamental nature of reality are fields, right? I think many physicists would say that. And it's because they take those ideas to be equivalent to reality itself. And this is a harmful notion. It's harmful because it's not correct, for one, and it's so obvious to see that's not correct. And yet these are often the people that are developing these theories. They take their work, their theories, their mathematical expressions to be reality itself. And you can see, if you go into it, that that is so clearly incorrect, right? But you're not going to see that unless you go into it. And you have to understand what it means to go into it. And you have to... So for one, here we are out in nature, which is the most true thing there is. Nature is uncorrupted by the human mind. And we have to go back to fundamentals here to understand this. Because this is not... It's an insight that you have that is not arrived at through reasoning. You can't reason your way to the point where you say that reality cannot be understood or described, or our ideas about reality are not reality, because you're within the realm of thought. Everything you can think about that is still thought, which is ideation, which is part of the brain. So the brain itself can't transcend the brain. Thought itself cannot transcend thought. And when we talk about reality and truth, we're talking about what can transcend thought. So you can't arrive at it through a series of logical arguments. And some people will say, well, then that's it, done. I don't want to talk any more about it. And anyone's free to do that at any point. But what you're missing is when you don't consider the fallibility of the reasoning process, or the fallibility of our realm of knowledge, which includes all mathematical descriptions of nature, all laws of physics. Everything that we've arrived at in that way is all a creation of human thought. First of all, do you see that? These things are not... It should be clearly obvious. It's 100% obvious to me. Because even if you just examine the history, right? How did these laws arise, right? They're not planting a seed and watering it and letting it grow. It's like the history of mathematics and physics has been, I mean, it goes back thousands of years. You know, go back to the Greeks and probably even further, and see how incrementally we have gotten to where we are now, bit by bit, by adding, adding, adding. It's been an adding process. And anything where you can add always shows you can never reach an end, because there's always more to add. We can always add more and more, right? We never reach an end to knowledge this way. And you can always add and refine and improve. And just by the very fact that it is a process of adding, incremental process of adding, right away should tell you, well, then it's not truth. Because truth, there's nothing you can add to it. Truth is truth, right? It's complete, it is whole, it goes beyond any incremental process of knowledge. If you don't see that, there's very little that we can even continue, right? That's the insight that one must have, is to see that truth is not arrived at through any sequence of words or theories. So there's an expression, the word is not the thing, right? The word tree is not the actual tree that's in front of me. This is a good starting point to have this discussion. We've said this before. It's not something I've come up with, right? This is, something Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti would say all the time. And again, you don't take those words as truth. You examine that and say, is there truth in that statement that the word is not the thing? What's a word? What's a thing? Are they equivalent? And I think it wouldn't take much examination to realize that if I say tree, that's not the same as the tree that stands before me. And here's another tree, and there's another tree, and there's trees all around us. Are all those trees the same? The word tree is the same, and if I use that word to describe all these trees, right off the bat we see why that word is incapable of capturing truth. Well, then you can come up with, oh, that's one type of tree, that's another type of tree. That's still not capturing truth. No description, no matter how many words you use, you could stand here all day long and come up with millions, thousands of words to describe this tree. No number of those words is the tree itself. Do you see that? It's very important. You can take images, pictures, videos. Dissect this tree, analyze it. You can go into its biology. You can take a leaf and look at it under the microscope. And how it would take an infinite number of years to completely analyze this tree, and that process of analysis doesn't lead you anywhere anyways. That's not the tree. And even biological descriptions of things are not the things. You can break it apart into systems and all this. These are constructs of human knowledge. These are ways that we, as limited human beings, have devised ways to understand pieces and parts of reality in a descriptive way, right? How does something, it doesn't get to any deeper questions, it doesn't get, and there are no questions in reality, in truth. There's no questions. Truth is truth. It's what is. Right, so the word ontology, right, it comes to mind that even in philosophy, there's the field of ontology, which is really the field of reality, being, existence. Again, though, when treated as philosophy, that is within the realm of thought, no different than any other description. But it does get to the point that there can be deeper questions we can ask about what is reality, what is truth, that are not arrived at through language, not arrived at through the process of human thinking. It should be fairly obvious that the brain itself is not capable of understanding the infinite. This finite brain, which is a part of, say, the universe, no matter how complex it is, no matter how amazing it is, cannot understand the entire universe. It's impossible for a part to understand the whole. It's just even mathematically impossible, right? It doesn't have enough degrees of freedom in it. It's not big enough. It's not to understand the immensity of the entire universe, and even to understand how. Thinking, as we've already said, thoughts are partial and incomplete, but the brain itself is finite. There's only so many thoughts it can have. There's only so much information it can contain, right? And we can look at information too as another very interesting way of looking about everything that we will get to. Maybe not in this video, but in another video. But I will hint at it here that there are new theories of physics one is called infodynamics, that actually take a whole fresh look at the laws of physics and biology, by the way, and computer science and everything in terms of information being the most fundamental aspect of our universe. Now, this is still a concept, so let's not get too excited. But information, like Shannon's information entropy, for which there are mathematical expressions. So there are some interesting papers out there, research papers, very current research papers, one published last year, where very respectable scientists are proposing alternative explanations of the laws of nature in terms of principles related to information rather than mass and energy, implying that mass and energy are not the most fundamental quantities of this universe. Information is. And this by starting with concepts related to information and showing that you can formulate laws related to information that then you can derive Newton's law of gravitation or even Einstein's general theory of relativity from an information theoretic viewpoint. And this is really fascinating to me because it does get around a lot of the issues. In fact, one of the things we talked about, one of the deficiencies of quantum field theory at the moment is that it's unable to capture gravity. And people are always looking for a theory of everything, which is something that even theoretically would describe the natural world that we understand in one mathematical framework. That framework may very well be based on information. And it's very interesting because it says things like mass. If you you have a definition of information, which you can look up Shannon's information entropy or whatever if you're so inclined. I could put a link to the article. Maybe I'll try to find it here because I don't like to go down these paths too much because I don't want this to become like a physics discussion forum. That's not what this is about. But there are a lot of people, including myself, who have been interested in physics and theoretical physics for many years, and I don't discount that. It's all within the realm of knowledge, though, right? So play whatever games you want. We can develop new theories of the universe based on information. But here's the point I'm trying to make. Things are changing all the time. People are always proposing new theories of the universe, theories that encompass other things, which means the previous theories weren't complete because there's always more. There's always different ways of looking at it. So it should be clear from that we are never going to reach an end point of knowledge where we feel that we have completely understood everything. The entire universe, nature, being, existence, everything. In terms of any mathematical theory, it's absurd. Never going to happen. We may get better at describing things and building better technology as a result. So don't use technology as proof of the reality of a mathematical concept. Because I think some people tend to do this, right? Oh, look at your phone. Your technology right now that you're using to record all this, right, was built with the knowledge that has been gained through science and engineering, and that makes it real. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Because you're not understanding what it means. What truth is versus ideas. You can come up with, people for thousands of years have known, people know how to use a club to beat each other over the head without knowing what wood is, right, or the atomic structure of matter, which one could regard as some form of matter, that we've learned. People know how to use things without understanding fundamentally what they are. This is why just saying that because we know how to manipulate this world, we understand causality, we understand how to explain certain natural phenomena, limited natural phenomena, I would say, through these laws that we devise, to mistake that for reality itself is just like, it's not an argument that makes sense. You can't say that just because you can use technology that therefore your ideas of technology are the fundamental reality, because they're ideas. They're just, and this is the thing, there's no reasoning here, right? Like, this isn't about me convincing anyone of anything that I say. I understand absolutely and in my blood that nothing that ever comes from human thought is a complete and holistic understanding of the universe. And I don't care how complicated it gets, I don't care how sophisticated it gets, because it's limited, just clearly, right? And there's no more to say about it. Like, it's finite, we're limited, and anything that comes from us is finite and limited. And there's no more that needs to be said than that. So create as many complicated theories as you want, as many complicated mathematical descriptions of reality as you want. You may explain certain behaviors, you may explain more and more. You still can't explain the tree. And no matter how much we understand field theory, if you really get down to it, it's dealing with particles, individual particles, or collections of particles, very small numbers of things. Cannot describe a tree. And you know, I went into this before by saying, well, people just say, well, of course it can. If we know the fundamental laws of the universe, then everything in this universe can be derived as a result of those equations. That's faith. That's not even true because it hasn't happened. And so it's not a truth. That's a leap of faith to say that the laws that we uncover as descriptive of fundamental particles that we can see in a particle accelerator, or, you know, in some other, beyond their range of validity, which at the moment is particle accelerators, maybe certain aspects of cosmology. Like, there are limitations to how these equations and descriptions and even the standard model of reality, right, is used. It's used to describe something we see at the very small level. It doesn't even encompass gravity yet, the largest level, right? So everything we know about the standard model of physics, quantum field theory, describes very small things, not very large things. One of the biggest deficiencies is gravity. It doesn't link with it. However, what I just mentioned, this theory of infodynamics, can explain gravity, and can also actually explain a lot of phenomena at the quantum level as well, because you can have information at the quantum level, you can have information on the cosmological scale. And this is a very interesting transition, right? Because what is information? And this gets down to some fundamental things. One thing that when a description of the universe gets mathematically complex, it starts becoming less beautiful to me, because I don't feel that the universe has a complicated explanation, right? I feel like it's the most simplest thing of all. And I think why it gets complicated is because humans, as limited creatures, we develop these ways of looking at the world through mathematics and science, and we come up with rules and things, and then we try to extend those rules to understand everything, and we find complexity. But we don't see that it's just a result, the complexity is a result of the mismatch between our ideas, our mathematical concepts and constructs that we've built, and reality, the truth, if you want to say. I do want to differentiate between truth and reality. Reality can be delusion. And we talked about this before, your reality could be your ideas about the world. If you are religious, your reality could be based on your religious beliefs, and you live your life according to those beliefs. That's your reality. If you're a physicist or an admirer of, physics and whatnot, you absorb as much information as you can about that. You think it's amazing that we can describe parts of the world that way, and you have faith that those laws can explain everything. It becomes your religion. And it certainly is faith, because, as I've said before, no one has ever shown you can explain a tree. And here's the thing, explain a tree? Explaining a tree is not the tree itself, right? But even then, the entire workings of that tree, from its top to bottom to just how it got here, through the millions of years of evolution, like it's a computationally intractable problem, right? The only way to explain that tree is to rerun the universe from the beginning to now, to get that tree where it is, and there's no simulation of the universe that can be, you can have no subset of the universe that can simulate the entire universe. I mean, that's just even a simple mathematical thing. What's interesting is that the infodynamics ideas lean towards the idea of the universe being some sort of simulation or some sort of computer program running. Now, what I find interesting about that, I don't, again, that's an idea, that's a belief, that's not, you can interpret things in many different ways. That is one interpretation of even what they are discovering. I don't see it that way. I see it as, what is a computer? A computer is simply a machine for executing very simple instructions over and over and over again, and can get to very complex outcomes by repeating those simple instructions over and over. I mean, a CPU has a very limited instruction set. All of AI, right, the complex thinking, all that essentially comes down to the simple operations in a CPU, a very small, well, small or large, depending on the instruction set of that CPU, at the assembly level, right, at the lowest level of how a computer operates. It has a series of rules, which are these instructions that it follows. It has memory, right? It has a procedure for executing these statements, and programs are simply combinations of these rules back to back to back, but it's applying that rule over and over and over again. The same set of rules, though, produce all the complexity that computers can produce, come about from a simple set of instructions that's repeated over and over again, plus memory. Right, the basics of a computer, how a computer works. It has a CPU, which is a rule execution system, and then memory, which is where you store the results. And we've talked about this before. Like a CPU without memory would execute all sorts of rules and retain nothing from it. And there would be no complexity at all in the universe in that case, or in that computer, because you wouldn't get anything interesting other than one code executed at a time. Which makes you think, what would we be without memory? So I just, I like to make these analogies just so that we, you don't confuse any of these analogies with what's actually happening, with what's actually real. But it is important to go into these because, we understand computers, we understand the technology that we have developed from all of this. We have it in our pockets. There's no denying that technology that exists and that we've gotten here from understanding it. But when we start talking about like the universe, right, and what is going on at a grander scale, and then you can show that some of those theories, I mean, that we can even develop more beautiful theories, and I do think it's a bit more beautiful to think of all the disparate areas of physics and biology and what could be taken in all these different ways with an even simpler conceptual framework, which could be this idea of information. And that information can be sort of, in some sense, regarded as the more fundamental constituent of reality. And that matter, energy, and information are all related. And then these laws that we come out, that come about through this framework can replicate the traditional laws that we've come to accept, like Newton's law of gravitation, for example. So what does that mean? Like, without going into detail about what infodynamics is, but there is a rule called the second law of infodynamics, and I will just mention it, that says that systems tend towards, that in this framework where you define entropy, information entropy, that there is a law that, again, what does that mean? But it is, that says that systems tend towards the lowest state, the lowest information entropy. Sort of the opposite of the second law of thermodynamics, which states that systems tend towards more disorder, generally, right, within themselves, in a closed system. This sort of says the opposite in terms of information, saying that information that the world sort of seems to operate in such a way that it wants more order and less disorder, if you want to think of it that way. That a state of disorder or higher informational entropy tends to want to reduce the disorder. And what's interesting is that's how these laws in this paper were derived, in a very simple manner, by the way, not very complicated at all. It's almost high school algebra. It's not very complicated math, because it's just discrete math, really, right? It's not even continuous math, right? Which gets to the whole field idea. Fields are continuous in that, there's no discretization of the field. But we even know from quantum mechanics that the universe is discretized, right? There's Planck's constant, which appears all over the place as a unit of discretization, that the world is not actually continuous. So even when the concept of fields being continuous doesn't comport with what we even understand about reality being discretized in a quantum way, right? That's all of what quantum, physics is all about. This idea of information actually works off of a discretized principle, saying the universe is discretized, and that the rules for how these discretized states, we talked about this before when we talked about time, that the universe can be regarded as sort of discretized states that evolve over time, is completely consistent with this infodynamics perspective. And the second law of infodynamics, which comes into play, limits the number of laws of physics, because it sort of says if you can define you have to relate information to the other quantities like mass and energy. But when you have a relationship, and there are papers where that's done, you relate information to mass and energy, then you can show that this second law of infodynamics is all you need to drive these other equations, these other laws of physics, which suggests something much more fundamental at work here, right? And that's kind of what we're going into. So, yeah, I guess it's just, I don't know how deep we want to go down that path for now, but let's see, what are we talking about here? How much time do we have? Oh, we haven't been going for very long at all. Oh, that's because I had to restart. All right, so we'll keep going here. So can we simplify the laws of nature down to information? This is what's really compelling. Current research is leading us in this direction. What is information? And you could start saying, well, information then is the more fundamental constituent of reality, if we can sort of describe other things in terms of this information. But then we're left with not understanding what information is. This is what gets interesting and a little speculative, right? One speculation here is that the universe is one large computer, essentially, a simulation or some sort of computational engine. That's okay. I mean, I don't think we want to think of this as the Matrix, right? Or in some strange way, like this is some computer sitting on a lab shelf in some other universe. It simply says the universe obeys certain computational laws. That's no more strange than saying the universe obeys the laws of gravity or the laws of electromagnetism. It's just a different restating of the law. So we may say there's a more fundamental, simpler rule, though, from which other laws can be derived based in information. So, okay. So I don't think we need to take the leap that we're inside a giant simulation, but this is what the author of this article says. It's possibility. He calls it speculative. So he realizes this is not based in fact, right? It's just it hints at that because it behaves like a computational machine. Big surprise. I think that's how the universe is a big computational machine. Well, this is interesting too because, and I'm going to bring in some really interesting ideas, the universal mind, the cosmic mind. We've talked about intelligence in the entire universe, right? That there being an intelligence greater than human intelligence. And now we're talking about even our descriptions of nature can be related to information, and that the universe may behave like a computer. Well, what's also another form of computer? Our mind. The brain is a computer, right? The brain is a computer in which thoughts arise, and thoughts could be regarded as information. There is a relationship between thought and information. Because, and this isn't fantastical, we've already talked about thought being a mechanical process related to memory, which is stored in the brain in physical ways, sensory input, which is a physical process, and the interaction between that, a response to memory. Thought being a response to memory of new sensory input. So if that is thought is also mechanical, also part of this universe. But then we're saying that the laws of nature that we see around us behave in a similar way to thought. So let's go crazy. What if we are simply a thought in a universal mind? That everything that exists are thoughts that obey certain informational rules, information being very much related to thought. So it really hints at something interesting, because, and we have to be careful here, because you can pull in, like, okay, if I say the universal mind, the cosmic mind, or whatever, then all of a sudden, you know, okay, we may be pulling in concepts that people refer to as God, right? But again, there's 10,000 definitions of that, so let's not go down that path. Let's just speak about it as it is. But say, okay, if the entire universe is a computational engine that obeys certain rules, why do we not see that as, say, a universal computer? I mean, if we're willing to say we live inside the previous author was willing to say we may live inside of a computer simulation. Why is that any stranger than saying we live inside of a giant mind, which is also a computational structure? We regard mind as being sort of that thing that processes information, you know, or is some greater thing, right? Now, we can only grasp this at some really low level, but it really gets interesting, because there is an intelligence to the universe. It's evident to us that we talked about this before. Is there intelligence beyond human intelligence? And I would say, of course there is, because all the stuff around us didn't require human intelligence to come into being. So it came into being, though, in some other way, through some other intelligence, you could say. And this doesn't have to be a supernatural intelligence, it's just the intelligence of the universe, the intelligence of this computational system that we may be in, and that may be driven by very simple laws, but like the intelligence is like we get to this complex state from a very simple, like it could be just the simplest thing in the world, right, that leads to where we are now. And we don't need to give it any more significance than that. But it's, you know, the reason it's hard to find words at this point, because like now we're talking about something that goes beyond words into the very nature and structure of reality, to what is this all about? Definitely more of an ontological understanding, right? And now we're dipping our toes in truth and reality in a different way than saying, are fields real? Is such a small question compared to what is the universe about? What is the truth of everything? And this is why I say don't stop at treating, and you know, something like a field, a mathematical description, as being that underlying reality, when the truth is much more interesting than that. The truth goes beyond these small concepts. And if there's any hope of understanding the truth, it can't be through that limited process of knowledge, because even if you think of the universe as a computational, as a cosmic mind, right, as a universal mind, well, maybe we're one thought in that universal mind. Can one thought, in the same way that human thought is limited, can us, if we're a single thought in this universal mind, how can that single thought understand the entire cosmic mind? It simply can't. So again, just seeing the limitations of who you are, what you are, clearly, and saying, I can't understand it. I, as a single thought in the cosmic mind, or as a just, minuscule ripple in cosmic intelligence, don't get the ego to think you can understand it all, because you simply can't. That is the biggest realization of all, that you are limited and finite and incapable of understanding it all. But then, that's maybe unsatisfying to a lot of people. They don't want to accept that, or don't want to see that. It's not a matter of acceptance. So, yeah, I mean, at that point, I don't know where to go, because it's not about just continuing to talk about words, right? We're led in a certain direction, and then we reach sort of a wall, right? That, well, okay, we're finite beings, and there's only so much we can do. Then why do we continue talking about this stuff? Why do we continue trying to make sense of it all? That is a point of realization. Why do we? And maybe we shouldn't. Maybe it should end. Maybe we should stop that seeking, I did want to say, and I don't think I made this clear, the distinction between truth and reality, because we are at a point where that needs to be made clear. We said that what is not truth, and I think we came to an understanding that anything resulting from thought, from human thought, is not truth, because it's limited and finite. And the truth is not limited, not finite. It's infinite, immeasurable. We'd all agree that the truth has to be immense. The truth has to explain everything, the entire universe. It can't, not explain, it is the entire universe. It can't be understood through any limited process. So anything that is derived from the mind, which is every thought, every concept, every religion, every scientific field of study, everything is a result of the human mind, therefore not complete, not truth. So not truth. But it can be reality, in the sense that, reality, we sometimes use that word reality to mean that this more fundamental reality, the underlying reality, what is real, right? And so it can be confusing to say, well, delusion can be real, but delusion is real, because delusion is a process in the mind, which is, in that sense, real. But it's not truth. So a deluded mind can live in a deluded world full of delusions, see that as its reality. And it is a form of reality, because it is what one believes. But if we really want to say what is real, right, we would like to say what is real beyond just the corruption of human thought. Is there a reality that's deeper than that? Well, these trees and this ground and all these creatures running around in the bushes and all that are not created by the human mind. They may be created by the universal mind, but they are not created by the human mind. So truth is what is, that is not corrupted by human thought. In fact, human thought is the origin of disorder, right? The origin of corruption is our limited thinking. So really, you can just say truth is what is not corrupted by limited, the ideas of the human mind. Because we create all kinds of fantastical notions about reality and mythology and religion and science, and just endless stream of ideas. That isn't truth. See that. And again, it's by negation, to see what is not truth, we may come upon what is true. Because just see what is not true, right? And what is everything that is not, what's left, in some sense, after the non-truths, is truth. When non-truth ends, truth is. So this is why so maybe a better question then is, are fields real? Is our fields true? Because our fields real, in some sense, in the way that they are descriptive accounts of reality, that they are ideas that some people live by, see the world through that lens, as diluted as it might be. It is real in that sense. Some people may consider that real. So let's reserve the word truth for what's higher than that. Not higher in a measurement process, because you can't measure, but that there's something else, right? A tree is true. What is true. Any description of it, not true. Any limited, partial understanding of it, not true, but could be a form of reality, a form of human reality. So these words get confusing. Again, it's words. So don't just see truth around you, then you don't need to worry about the words, right? To have some understanding through observation, not through knowledge, not through accumulation of knowledge, some understanding of what is true. And that you don't need any of these concepts or ideas to be walking in a forest and experience, the wind, like the birds, which is what we're forgetting by doing all this talking, right? Is what's around us, is all this natural beauty that is here at this moment in time, whatever time is, in this vast universe, which could be infinitely expansive. We are here right now witnessing what is happening and being part of it, intimately being part of it, and to just see that without the verbiage, without the conceptual breakdown. Stop that ideation process, image making that we just have, and just take in that immensity. And not as a single entity that is experiencing this immensity, but just the immensity itself, that you are not part of, you are that immensity. And again, that's another idea. Just the words need to end, because any words I use to try to describe truth fail, and then one can be confused. So it's just not that hard. I don't claim to have any knowledge of anything. This is the beauty of it. It's not about knowledge. It's not about having something that you're trying to convey to another. The truth of one cannot be conveyed to another. Truth is simply what is. It's not something I have. It's not something I know. It's not something I, have that I can give to another. The truth, there's no giving of truth. Truth just is. All I may be doing is just pointing out that truth is there to be observed by everyone. And that's it. There's no other way to put it. There's no method. I'm not going to teach you a method, because there isn't any. This is why anyone, there's no claim of knowledge or methods or procedures. It's like all I'm trying to do in some sense is say, don't listen to anybody else that tries to tell you that is the way to truth. Find truth on your own way, or let truth find you, is a better way of putting it. Don't try to seek it. Don't try to explain it. Explain the world if you have to, but recognize that isn't truth. So, there is no real yes-no answer to "are fields real?" which started this whole discussion, but it leads to this deeper understanding that we're trying to get to that goes beyond all conceptualization. And that's what's important. Not debating whether fields are real or not real, because there's no answer to that. See what is true, and then that becomes meaningless, a meaningless question. That's the point. So, all right. I think we've said enough about this today. It was a fun walk. And I don't know, again, what this is all about, but it is just happening. And in that happening, it is true. All right, let's call it a day. And I hope you find some beauty and joy wherever you're at.